Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well today. So today I want to talk about something that I think is not discussed all that much, but it's one of the most important things, I think, in photography and in any creative pursuit. And that is how we think of ourselves internally and how we present our work to the world. I think maybe it's not discussed that much because it's kind of weird to talk about, and there's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. So I think that's exactly why we should talk about it. So I will share my experience, and I would love to hear about your experience. If any of this resonates, or if you have any thoughts or feedback, or just anything in general, leave a comment after watching this video. I would love to hear from you. For me personally, my harshest critic, worst enemy, and biggest roadblock with my creative work is myself. My story goes like this. I always took my camera with me on hikes and adventures. Long before I get into photography, it was just a way to capture beautiful moments. Eventually, I started to edit my photos a little bit, and it was just kind of a fun, creative thing. And photography was still not something that was really on my radar as I think of it now. Eventually, I discovered 500px, and I saw all the beautiful works out there, all the incredible images. And I got really inspired, and I wanted to create images that were like that. I wanted to create something truly beautiful that's truly a work of art. Over time, photography took over as the primary pursuit, and my bar for my images started to climb higher and higher. Soon enough, I started to see my past images as not good and even embarrassing, and that likely was sometimes the case. What was happening is I was entering the valley of despair phase of the Dunning-Kruger curve. Now, if you're not familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, basically there's this false confidence that you get in the beginning when you start a new pursuit, thinking that, I'm really getting it, it makes sense. And soon enough, you start to realize that, actually, I'm not very good and I still have a very long way to go. And that's what's called this valley of despair phase, where self-doubt sets in and a lot of people struggle and actually quit. Now, I know not everybody necessarily experiences this Dunning-Kruger effect, but I certainly do. And so I found myself feeling quite bad about my work. And I think the best thing I could have done at that point, and this is my first piece of advice for my past self, and something I wish I did differently, was not thinking of myself as a photographer. Instead, I should have kept seeing it as a hobby for as long as possible. And in fact, I should still be seeing it as a hobby. Because when it's a hobby, you allow yourself to be creative. It's just fun. There's no pressure. You don't need to meet some bar. It's just purely the enjoyment of the activity. You're not constrained by some specific style, for example. Basically just having fun without the pressure. And I think that's really important no matter how good you are, but especially in the beginning. And with putting my work out there, I wish I never called myself a photographer. If I continued to think of myself as just a hiker with a camera, I think the bar would have been much lower. And yes, maybe the bar from other people, but most importantly, the bar from myself. Really, probably nobody cares how I present myself or what my images look like, but it would have been helpful to keep my presentation of myself aligned with that idea of it's just a hobby. Even if I knew back then that I wanted to become really good one day, and that's of course still a work in progress. The second thing that I think might have been not a bad idea is to use a pseudonym. So this is unusual for photographers, but many other creative people use pseudonyms, like musicians, for example. The idea is basically disconnecting the creative work from yourself. So taking your ego out of it, not having to worry about that work being connected to your name and then being embarrassed about how bad it is. It ends up being kind of a mental trick to take some of the pressure off. And with all of this, that's kind of the goal, just removing the pressure and allowing yourself to be creative, to learn, to experiment, and have a nice time with it. Now, I do want to make a note. It's really awesome when people who are really good still share their early works, because it shows the rest of us what's possible, and that they didn't start out as some kind of genius. They, in fact, were not so good in the beginning and took a long time to get to where they are now. So I think it's great. It shows a lot of courage and vulnerability, and I'm certainly not suggesting that people hide their early work. But when I was starting out, I think I would have found it helpful to just not have it be connected to myself. And the last thing I want to talk about, And this is something I have kind of figured out now, but it would have been helpful earlier. And that is being mindful and selective about which platforms I'm using to share my work. So I think Instagram is really not a good platform for photographers. Your work is competing with video content and paid content and all kinds of not photography related things. And you're also competing with the best photographers in the world who are sharing their absolute best images from a decade of full-time photography and have 1 million followers. So even if your work is getting close to where they're at, it's still not going to do nearly as well just because the following plays such a big role. I personally really enjoy platforms that are smaller and more photography focused, where you can get a rating of your work that's more focused on the quality, and also places where you can just get constructive feedback and criticism. I think that can really help you grow. So I'm thinking places like Fstoppers or the Landscape Photographers Worldwide, Discord server, different local photography clubs or Facebook groups, and just friends and mentors. Finally, I think that contests can actually be really great. Now, we can criticize contests for all kinds of valid reasons, but they can also give you a rough idea where you are. I know for me personally, it was really helpful to see my images doing well in contests. If my images stand side by side images that I think are actually good, then okay, maybe that tells me that my images are better than I think. And that can really give you a confidence boost and some motivation to keep going, which can be really helpful in that valley of despair phase that I mentioned earlier. All that being said, I think I've left a question unanswered. And that is, when should we think of ourselves as photographers? And I guess I don't have a good answer. I think it's about what helps you create more images and enjoy the process. So if it helps to call yourself just somebody who points cameras at stuff, even when you're a professional, that's great. If you find it helpful to think of yourself as a photographer early on, that's also totally fine. I think it's not really so much about what other people think, but it's about being in alignment with yourself. So I hope that made sense. That's my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts. As I said, there's all kinds of stuff we can explore about this topic, and yeah, let's get the conversation going. All right, I hope that wasn't too rambly. I feel like I was a little bit all over the place, so I hope that made sense. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you again on the next adventure, which, by the way, will not be here at my desk again. I will be going out to do some photography and bringing you along very soon, so stay tuned for that, subscribe and all of that stuff, and I will see you then.